Viewers, a highly anticipated summit between American President Donald Trump and Russia's President Vladimir Putin has ended without any agreement to halt or resolve the ongoing war. While both leaders described the talks as productive, there was no breakthrough or commitment on the central issue of the conflict. Donald Trump claimed great progress had been made, stating that many points that were agreed upon, though a few remain unresolved. He, however, claimed that there's no deal until there's no deal.
I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelenskyy and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Ratcliffe, thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has praised his recent talks with Trump, describing them as constructive and saying that the two leaders have reached an understanding. Putin also reaffirmed Trump's long-standing claim that the war in Ukraine would not have started if Donald Trump remained in office and he was the president, saying that the conflict escalated during the Biden administration. He also alleged that he had warned President Biden about the risks of escalation prior to the outbreak of the hostilities.
I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good, businesslike and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine.
All right, let's take a look at the key takeaways from this summit. No ceasefire, but certainly progress has been made. Second takeaway is that there has been no Ukraine deal after the Alaska meet, something that was perhaps expected. Trump has called Zelenskyy as well as NATO leaders. That was first expected, but now that has been done. Putin has said he's interested in ending the war. In fact, Vladimir Putin has proposed the next meeting in Moscow. Now, what grabbed eyeballs, ladies and gentlemen, was how Russian President Vladimir Putin received an unusually warm welcome as he arrived in U.S. The visit began with a grand reception, a firm handshake, smiles, and a ride in the presidential limousine. American F-35 fighter jets and a B-2 stealth bomber conducted a flypast as well to mark Putin's arrival. Donald Trump, meanwhile, as we told you, has held a phone call with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the Ukrainian president, as well as leaders of the European Union after the Alaska summit. Now, Zelenskyy is expected to meet with Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. on Monday next week. Zelenskyy has confirmed this upcoming meet. In fact, Donald Trump has also confirmed this. And this meeting is, of course, going to be taking place at the Oval Office. Let me quickly go across to my colleague Srinjoy, who has now been, tracking all of the takeaways and, of course, what happened in that meeting. Srinjoy, that crucial meeting that the world had its eyes on has ended. Now the world will, of course, look forward to what happens in Washington, D.C. on Monday with Volodymyr Zelenskyy meeting with Donald Trump. That is something that is happening on expected lines, but not perhaps so soon.
Yes, you're right. There are three that Zelenskyy is likely to tell Donald Trump. One, that he should proceed and ensure that the fighting comes to an end in Ukraine. And this is because there have been huge casualties on both sides. And according to estimates, 1 million people have been killed or wounded in the fighting, if you take Russian and Ukrainian losses. Secondly, he would ask for an exchange of prisoners of war. And thirdly, he would ask for Ukrainian children, he says, have been taken by the Russians to be returned to Ukraine and their families. These are three major points that will come up. Of course, the land issue is important. The Russians have taken Crimea in 2014 and also Donetsk and Luhansk more recently. Yeah. Now, naturally, the Ukrainians are not keen to give it back. Russians are not keen to give it back, and the Ukrainians want it. So how do you solve the problem? And this lies at the of it all. How can you have any kind of peace unless...
All right, Srinjoy, thanks very much for joining us at the moment. Of course, viewers, this is a crucial summit that has happened. This was not supposed to be a summit that would have had a solid conclusion to this conflict. But yes, it does lay the groundwork for the next meeting, which is now expected in Washington, D.C. on Monday next with the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy meeting with Trump. Let me quickly go across to my colleague Meenakshi, who's getting us the latest that Zelenskyy has put out as far as his meeting is concerned.
Well, Shreya, what Zelenskyy says, we put out earlier, what we're going to take you through now is India's statement. Very, very significant. This is the statement of MEA, and this is also a statement after the Alaska summit. India, as usual, obviously, batting for peace. I'm going to read this statement from the MEA. India welcomes the summit meeting in Alaska between the US President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin of Russia. Their leadership in the pursuit of peace is highly commendable. India appreciates the progress made in the summit. The way forward can only be through dialogue and diplomacy. The world wants to see an early end to the conflict in Ukraine. So that's a statement coming in from the side of the MEA. That statement has been put out. India, as we were telling you, Shreya earlier, batting for peace, saying that the world wants to see an early end to the Ukraine conflict.
Meenakshi, thanks very much for getting us India's response. Remember, India has, since the announcement of the Alaska summit, said that it endorses the way to peace, these summits that are happening. This is, of course, the first meeting that happened. Now we're going to see the second most important meeting that's going to be happening between Donald Trump as well as Zelenskyy, who's going to be traveling to Washington, D.C. But remember, Zelenskyy has also put out a post saying that following a conversation with President Trump, we further coordinated positions with European leaders. And he said that in my conversation with President Trump, I said that sanctions should be strengthened if there is no trilateral meeting or if Russia tries to evade an honest end to the war. So that assertion of sanctions still holding. Let's see what happens with the Zelenskyy meeting Trump. But of course, no ceasefire right now, no peace agreement either between the two sides. We'll keep getting you the latest, viewers. It's time for a short